but not least, also the project coordinator, José María Miranda Boto, is going to join us. We're going to present some important findings of our DIGILARE project that we conducted during the past 2 years. So without much ado, I'm going to share on the first slide, and let's dive into our project. That is here, and ideally you should be able to see this very presentation now.
Yes, it's visible.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Luca, for giving me the signal. So in this very project, the DIGILARE project, we took as kind of as a starting point what the Commission had undertaken in the past few years to strengthen industrial democracy. And that is very nicely depicted by what Ursula von der Leyen promulgated when standing as a candidate for second mandate for 24 till 26 in front of European Parliament, where von der Leyen stated that la démocratie européenne doit être plus participative, meaning that European democracy must be more participative. And in the same vein, we read in the European Social Pillar Action Plan that social dialogue, information and consultation, as well as participation of workers, they actually play an important role, in particular with a view to the ongoing twin transitions and the changes in the world of work. However, in the DIGILARE project, we've asked ourselves, which role do participation rules actually play in today's world of work, in particular, taking into account that participation rates are decreasing all over Europe. Thus, we've asked ourselves, do the current rules and participation models actually display the needs of those working in a digitalized world of work? Do they fit the EU's path to the digital decade? In DIGILARE, we, meaning a team of researchers from all over Europe, we had identified 4 coordinates to navigate us through these and other questions. Those 4 coordinates are the following. The first one is on the personal scope of application of information and consultation rights. We've asked ourselves whether information and consultation rights at company and undertaking level also apply to non-standard workers, including crowd workers, thus the WHO. And we're extremely proud that 2 of our project members, Lida Hilotero and Cristina Schnittler from University of Santiago de Compostela and University of Vienna, actually already published the first findings of this first coordinate, the WHO, in this year's European Labour Law Journal. Therefore, also this first coordinate is not going to be part of today's presentation, since there is this extremely well-written article already published in European Labour Law Journal. The second coordinate, which I'm going to deal with in my presentation right now, is on the where. So the question on which law is the applicable one in a cross-border telework context. Because within the project, we realized that in particular transnational companies, but also non-transnational companies and their workers' representatives struggle as regards the applicability of the right or correct employee representation rules. Thirdly, under the how, and this is going to be part of Nicola Gundt's presentation, we assessed the national approaches when it comes to implementing digital representation rights. So in short, what about, for example, digital voting or digital meetings? Our assumption was that the more low-key possibilities for participation exist in a digital world of work, also the more underrepresented groups, for example, women, caretakers, or disabled persons would actually engage in workplace representation. Lastly, our fourth coordinate deals with the what. Which participation rights at workplace level exist as regards protecting human dignity when implementing AI tools or digital surveillance systems? What are the needs of persons working in a digital world of work. And that's where Luca Ratti's presentation comes in, who is going to present us the status quo of the current discussions on a right to disconnect. So without much ado, I would like to start with the presentation on the second coordinate, on the where. Why is this so important? We all know that telework has risen dramatically in the past few years after the COVID pandemic. In 2023, more than 44 million employees teleworked across the European Union. Yet, telework is not a strictly national phenomenon. In practice, employees sit and work, thus they are located in different states, but nevertheless they work together cross borders by using digital tools and modern ways to communicate. Other teleworkers do not necessarily cooperate in the same way, but they perform crowd work via platforms, also by crossing borders in a digital way. In both scenarios, we can speak of a so-called digital cross-border workplace. In the DIGILARE project, we set out to explore potential legal lacunae when it comes to information and consultation rights in a cross-border telework context. In other words, which member state's jurisdiction applies in a cross-border telework context? Of course, we were not the first ones to assess these questions. Already back then in 1959, the German legal scholar Franz Gamilschek noted that the determination of the applicable labor law in a cross-border context is the most contentious and doubtful issue of labor law, in particular as regards collective representation rights. Of course, we all know that today, for community scale undertakings and community scale groups of undertakings, there's the European Works Council Directive, which of course establishes rules on information consultation as regards transnational matters. However, what if the work itself is performed in a transnational way? For these cases, the Euroworks Council Directive does not offer any solutions. What about digital work, telework, work from home, or other modern forms to organize, such as in matrix organizations, where the work itself is performed in a cross-border way? All these situations might lead to the fact that some workers are simply not covered by information and consultation rules and practices, because according to their respective jurisdictions, where they sit and work, the necessary connection or link to collective representation rights is not given. This, of course, is highly problematic. Why? Because Article 27 of the Charter of Fundamental Rights of the European Union actually establishes that the right to information and consultation is a fundamental right. Not least because of this fundamental rights nature of information consultation rights, we in the project assessed that it should actually be in the interest of all stakeholders to establish a set of rules facilitating the search for the most suitable information consultation rights to be applied in a cross-border telework context. Thus, in our view, and we're going to come back to that at the end of this presentation, in our view, the EU legislator should actually strive for enabling employees and their representatives to actually exercise their fundamental rights. But the legislator at the same time should also facilitate employers with practical solutions and practical rules to live up to their legal obligations. Yet, as already mentioned, the situation is not an easy one. So there's no easy solution to be found DIGILARE nor by social partners. Within the project, we not only had identified 4 coordinates that we wanted to assess by comparative legal research, but our second and third objectives were to create best practices, to assess best practices with stakeholders, and to actually create a common legal kind of understanding together with stakeholders. For that reason, we of course also consulted with stakeholders. This means social partners and practitioners, in particular on the rules of information and consultation cross-border situations. And their feedback was that the current national rules are difficult to assess. In practice, though, this often is only a marginal problem. Why? Because in practice, first and foremost, companies strive for finding easy solutions, not for information consultation issues, but for social security and tax reasons. So social security and tax law are actually in practice the driving factors for companies to establish subsidiaries in all countries where employees factually sit and work. At the same time, of course, this also allows to then apply those national information consultation rights where the employees sit and work because there's already a subsidiary established. This company, so this subsidiary, then is also often the contractual party to the employment relationship under the law of that country. This solution, though, cannot be generalized to all European legal practices. So apparently there is a factual need to have practical solutions in place. And this is also more or less reflected by the old European Social Partner Framework Agreement on Telework. When we read its Article 4 in conjunction with its Article 11, we might be tempted to conclude that as regards collective rights, in particular as regards information and consultation rights, the law of the country where the employer's premises are situated applies. Yet, there's also an implementation report to this very old social partner framework agreement. And this implementation report shows that several legal uncertainties exist as regards, in particular, cross-border situation. Also, the report states that in case a review of this social partner framework agreement on telework takes place, a more in-depth analysis of cross-border situations could usefully be considered. Well, within the DIGILARE project, we have undertaken such an in-depth analysis. Unfortunately, though, we all know that social partners could not agree on a new agreement on telework in November 2023. Also, as a result of this, the European Commission took the floor and initiated a first phase consultation of social partners under Article 154 TFEU in April 2024 on possible areas of EU action in the area of telework and the right to disconnect. And within that first phase consultation, we can read that geographical mobility and cross-border telework are one of the 5 areas where also, according to this Commission document, challenges exist as regards telework. The consultation document also states the following, and I cite now: an EU initiative on telework could aim to ensure that teleworkers enjoy the same collective information and consultation rights as they would if working from the employer's premises and as comparable workers would do. Yet, what if no or hardly any employees actually work at the employer's premises? What is the link or the connecting factor for the application of information consultation rights? On that, the first as well as the second phase of the consultation remain silent. By conducting case studies, we in the DIGILARE project actually set out to identify those linking factors. The status quo, according to national law and legal traditions, is the following for cross-border telework and the linking factor. Well, first, we have to admit that the national legislators in most countries do not directly refer to the question of which countries information consultation rights actually apply in cross-border situation. Also, hardly any case law exists. So many of the following assumptions are based on interpretations of the existing provisions, and many of them have not yet been confirmed by the courts. The following criteria were the one that we identified. So the following linking factors for information consultation rights exist according to national law and practice. First one, the employment contract. Second one, trade union membership. Then there's a quite large group of companies where the establishment, so being connected with the establishment, being part of the establishment, serves as linking factor. Part of that in some member states, in France and in Spain, or France and Spain also require recruitment in their very member state as linking factor. In Hungary, for example, the habitual place of work is the linking factor for information and consultation rights. And then as a kind of alternative linking factor, also a concept of collectivity of interests exists in France. A criterion also sometimes presented as linking factor is territoriality, yet territoriality is not actually a real linking factor, but it's a nevertheless relevant concept. Why? Because first, of course, it does not relate to the question of which law is the applicable one. Rather, it is simply a rule stating that a specific country's rules on information consultation apply if, for example, the establishment, you remember the establishment as linking factor, establishment is located in the very member state. Or, for example, if the work, if we talk about the habitual place of work, is carried out in this very member state. As recent case law, though, shows, those traditional linking factors might actually lead to legal lacuna. And what is particularly interesting here is one statement by the Austrian Supreme Court of Justice in a relatively recent case from 25 June this year, where the court stated that whether this concept of establishment is actually compatible with a digitalized modern world of work is nothing for the courts to decide. This very judgment also raises two further issues. First, namely that under Austrian doctrine and similar doctrinal concepts exist in other member states, for example, in Spain, France, Portugal, and Ireland. According to these doctrinal solution is that there's also a so-called principle of extension, meaning that if a worker is not located in the territory of the member state, but works in another member state, under certain circumstances, the very host or home member state's rules kind of extend to other persons working in other member states. Of course, the circumstances under which this extension applies differ from member state to member state. So what is our interim conclusion? Unfortunately, there's hardly any legal research on how these national rules actually interact. So our interim conclusion is that there might actually exist legal lacuna for cross-border teleworkers. And with a view to the fundamental rights nature of information and consultation rights, in our view, this should not be the case. And because of time reasons, I'm not going to go into much detail on the Erzberger case, but we know from the court's Erzberger case that the member states, in particular in those areas, and information consultation is actually an area that is not generally harmonized, but only partially, that in those areas where there's no harmonization, the member states are relatively free to set the criteria for defining the geographical scope of application of their national information and consultation regimes. Thus, this is the actual status quo we have to work with. Nevertheless, within the DIGILARE project, we have set out to come up with potential legal solutions for this legal lacuna. And in the last remaining 3 minutes, I would like in particular to present the one solution that in our view is the most daring one, but perhaps also the one that is most likely to be a feasible one. So not a 28th legal regime, not a 28th linking factor, but a conflict of law set of rules. This would be the third possibility that we have tried to identify and to work on. So from a formal point of view, to establish actually a conflict of law set of rules for information and consultation rights, from a formal point of view, there are more or less 4 options on how such a set of rules could be actually designed. The first one would be to amend the specific information and consultation directive. The second one would be to amend one of the 2 Rome regulations, although we are of course aware of the fact that neither of the 2 actually fits, in particular because Rome 1 is on contractual obligations, and according to the laws and traditions of most member states, information and consultation rights is actually not a contractual obligation. Of course, we could also aim for a social partner agreement, but as we have seen with the old framework agreement on telework, on the one hand, it is not very likely for such an agreement to happen. On the other hand, this would in the end then again lead to a variety of solutions in the member states. Thus, we set out to actually establish a specific set of conflict of rules on the legal basis of Article 81 TFEU, which is on the proper functioning of the internal market on judicial cooperation, civil matters having cross-border implications. And let us not forget that cross-border telework actually has internal market implication, and therefore also such a conflict of law set of rules would be necessary to guarantee, as Article 81 paragraph 2 requires, to guarantee proper functioning of the internal market. So what I'm not going to do, also for time reasons, I'm not going to present the whole conflict of law set of rules that we have set up. And this can be then read by everyone in the policy paper that we're going to upload on the project's website after this very seminar. But let me very briefly just highlight the important aspects that were our guiding or our guidelines when designing these rules. So first, we have established as necessary criterion for this conflict of law set of rules to be applicable in the first place that employees necessarily need to work together via digital tools for a quite high amount of their working time. And we have taken percentages from other coordination rules, namely Social Security coordination, the 883/2004, and the implementation regulation, as well as the multilateral agreement on telework. So in our view, at least a 25 or even a 50% threshold should be established. Then we've also taken from the Social Security coordination regulation the definition for cross-border telework. Why come up with a new definition when there's already a very nice definition established by the EU legislator? Our general rule in this conflict of law rules strives to make the law of the country applicable where central management is situated. And those of you familiar with the Euro Works Council directive will realize that we've taken this concept from the European Works Council directive. For all employees, in case a certain amount of them performs telework in the above mentioned extent. What is the most daring part, in our view, is Article 4 of the conflict of law set of rules that we established, namely an alternative way to determine the applicable law for information and consultation in a cross-border telework context, namely by a decision by a joint employee representative body, provided that certain relatively high thresholds are met. In our view, Such an alternative determination might also revitalize employee representation mechanisms at national level. Thus, in the end, and I come to the conclusions, such a revitalization of employee representation mechanisms could hopefully also contribute to more participative democracy, as stipulated by von der Leyen in front of the European Parliament. Yet, as another ex-commissioner Delors stated, for the community, it is not only the fruit of history and of necessity, but also of the willingness of the parties. And the same is true for a functioning collective representation at workplace level. Also, such a functioning collective representation at workplace level is the fruit of willingness to engage from both sides, labor and management, and in our case, in our view, in particular as regards cross-border telework, also the fruit of willingness of the legislator to actually create rules which cater for the needs for persons working in a digital world of work. And with that, I would like to close the first part of this seminar and hand the floor to my colleague, Nicola Gundt.
Thank you very much, Elisabeth, for this interesting introduction and for the couple of words that I can immediately use for my introduction. But let me first try the technical side. Can you see this?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. So thank you, everyone, for being with us. Thank you for joining us. And as Elisabeth already said, this part of the presentation is on the how part. It's on how we can potentially revitalize and adapt forms of information and consultation, employee participation in a digitalized employment world. So what we tried in this aspect is seeing what Elisabeth described, 44 million people working at least partly from home, from places not being the establishment, if that exists at all. How then can we make sure that people feel represented, that there is a connection between the representing person and those represented? And that's what I'm going to talk about. I will very briefly start with two formal aspects, because we realized immediately that digitalization of information and consultation, of employee participation, is way too much. So we focused on three main questions. I will go into, and you can see that on the next slide, I will go into three questions. The first one being whether there are or we need explicit rules on digitalized elections. How then we will deal with digitalization of meetings and or decision-making in these meetings. And I think this one has become very important with the recent revision of the directive on European Works Councils, which now in Article 6 allows for hybrid or even fully online meetings. So we really have to find some common ground in how to get everyone comfortable, get everyone on board with digital meetings and decision-making in digital meetings. The third question is linked to these two, because this means that if we go for digital elections, if we go for digital meetings, we will also need to make sure that there are means and equipments for those to represent and to be represented, to actually reach out, to actually do their work properly. They need access to data. Do they need access to the establishment, to the digital establishment, these kinds of things? That's what I will be discussing. But before I go into depth, I just want to make sure that we're all on the same page. And the first thing, of course, is Elisabeth said it. It's worth keeping. It's absolutely necessary that we keep that. But actually, why? Why do we think industrial democracy, workplace, employee participation is necessary to keep? And that's what I put into this slide briefly for you. Why should we care about industrial democracy, workplace representation? Why should employers care? Why should employees care? It's quite easy to see that for both parties involved, there are really huge benefits. For example, employers, they find generally that they have a competitive advantage. Employee involvement generally leads to better decisions because they're more balanced. It also leads to quicker reactions. If something is wrong in the production process, if expectations don't match, and if the employees feel involved, they will come up with signaling the issue, they will come up with potential solutions, and things will get solved much more quickly. And this offers a huge competitive advantage. Also, having good relations, good workplace relation can be a huge asset if you want to keep employees in your company, or if you want to attract scarce employees. So that's for employers is a definite advantage. So it's not that they have to invest in something and will not get anything out of that. For employees, I think we're all familiar with the advantages of industrial democracy, because the general idea of employee participation is to balance the power, balance the interest of employer-employee, giving the employee a voice, and all this, if done correctly, leads to better decision making, leads to employees feeling heard, leads to, if you want, a certain loyalty, although I would be careful with that, because I don't want every employee to feel like a big family and being exploited by that family, by that workplace family. But yes, a certain form of loyalty can definitely help. So if someone feels heard, they might wish to also react in a more human way, to say so. And finally, and I think that's something that we should not overlook, there's also, to quote Harry Potter, the greater good. And there's been extensive German and Swiss research on this. If there are proper democratic structures at work where someone is for 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. So if you're exposed to this workplace democracy, functioning workplace democracy 5 days a week, that leads to some measurable resilience against autocratic views. So employees engaging in forms of workplace democracy are getting used to being heard, they're getting used to discussing things, and they will be less likely to follow someone without questioning. They will also be less likely to exclude certain people. And another thing is that I think we also should have a look, because it's so important to also keep that in mind. If you see the developments in especially the USA and the United Kingdom, and with a concentration of concerns, proper industrial democracy can help fighting financialization of work. It can help having decisions made where actually the employees are. It can help to have, well, to put it bluntly, to leave the money in the establishment and not to give it to the shareholders for short-term gains. So I think employers have a very crucial advantage here. Employees obviously have advantages, but also for everyone else, for society at large, there are things to be gained by strengthening workplace democracy. And if that means that we need to digitalize these things, then we should really get into how we should be doing this. However, if we want to, I'm sorry, we have a fire alarm here. I'm really sorry. No, it stopped. Sorry for that. Sorry. What was I? Oh yeah. If we want to start digitalizing our democracy as we're used to it, we should try to keep processes and ideas familiar to make everyone as much as easy as possible. So this is what I would very briefly just show to you. This is what we're used to. If we talk about democracy, democratic voting, democratic decision-making, these are principles everyone is familiar with. And if we change everything to this black box of computer voting and computer programs and everything, we should really make sure that everyone can find these issues back as much as possible to make the transition for everyone involved as easy as possible and as uncontested as possible. So very generally, information must be accessible. The process of voting or deciding must be accessible. There must be general safeguards as to voting and decision making. You have to make sure that people can voice their opinions and decide as they would like to, and not because someone is sitting under the table and, I don't know, holding a gun to their legs or whatever. When it comes to technical issues, and I think that really is a crucial thing, we need to make sure that processes are reliable, that rules are enforced, that everyone can figure out, oh yes, they probably work, there's transparency on that. And by that, I don't mean sharing some weird kind of code, because that's not transparency that we need. We have to think also about external control. Like, do we need to certify programs that we need and these things? And we have to think, as the French system taught us, on the possible validation of the outcomes. If there are any elections that are purely digital, how can we potentially validate? That's something that I do not yet have a solution to, but keep that in mind for now. So these are the general backgrounds. And then what did we find? How do countries deal with digitalized elections? Are they allowed? Are they not? This is what we asked everyone in our working group. And as you can see, the practices vary wildly. There's a couple of very clear no's. No digitalized elections. There's one explicit yes from France. So there is actually, if we wanted to, there is a blueprint on how to set up digital elections, on how to look into safeguards. We could also use, for example, some of the case law that is there already to already eliminate the aspects that still don't work that well. So we could use that example if we wanted to. There are some countries that are not very sure what they want, and then there are what we call the chameleons, that are the countries where the rules are not very clear, potentially also because they're a bit older already, but practice seems to allow all kinds of digitalization. And I can speak for myself. For the Dutch system, the law does not establish anything on digital elections, but the standard rules, the model rules that are sent out by the Social and Economic Council, they allow for digitalized elections. And they also add a couple of safeguards. Please look into this, into that, into that. But there is no checks on that. If I speak for the University Council, for example, the program on which these elections are run has been built by some employees, a couple of, I think, more than 10 years ago already. It's never been questioned. It's never been discussed. And when I asked the chief auditor, he said, no, it's not an issue. We trust everyone and it works. So there's that. So that's, I think, wildly different from the quite specific French situation. And then we have the very curious case of Spain, where you have a distinction between the ordinary workers being the ones that work at the workplace and the remote workers, for whom different rules apply. So what you can see here is We have a couple of strict no's, and if we wanted to, we really need to look into why there's the no and how we can discuss that. We have one very clear yes, and we have lots of fun. We're not as such opposed to it, but let's see. And then we have those, we keep it in practice, and it works so far. So that's for the digitalized elections. When it comes to meetings and decision-making, because that was something that we immediately realized, we cannot deal with them in one thing because the rules differ. Digitalized elections, yeah, okay, fine. We've had that. Digitalization of meetings. Can employee representatives, can they meet online? The new European Works Council's directive says, yes, they can, and they should. So we really need to figure out how to do this. And most of the countries actually are fine with digital meetings. There are some prerequisites on how to get access to digital meeting rooms and confidentiality, but generally speaking, the meetings as such are not the major issue. It may depend on internal regulations. It may also depend on collective bargaining agreements. But very generally, the digitalization of the meetings is not the main issue. When it comes to decision-making in these meetings, it becomes more difficult because there also, how do you make sure that those representing and those deciding are doing this without anyone interfering? How do you make sure that everything remains confidential? How do you make sure that everyone can only vote once? All these things. There are several service providers that offer these services already. There are also certified service providers for this. So there are already tools in place that allow for this. And I'd be interested to hear what Luca has to say on this no from Luxembourg in this, because Luxembourg really on the decision-making is no, we don't want digital decision-making as of now. So I'm really curious on how the European Works Council directive will maybe change or maybe not change this. So probably this is the part that will evolve quite quickly. When we try to figure out, is it worth trying digitalization? You can see some very clear advantages. And I think also that's what Elisabeth mentions, revitalization of the process. Digitalization generally leads to a higher turnout. The process is simplified. You don't need everyone to count the votes. It's easier. It's a lot less costly. You'll also spare the environment. However, you cannot recount. If you have digital voting only, you cannot recount as of now. You also have no oversight as to who uses digital access codes. Is it really that employee, or has someone else hacked the systems and has done that? How easy is it to interfere with these systems? Is maybe digital work, is it less accessible for certain groups? Think of digital illiteracy, think of tools that are not self-evident. These would be issues that that need to be addressed. If you ask me, how important are the risks? As to the third aspect, the no oversight as to identity and confidentiality, this also is already an issue if you have mail-in ballots. So if you can mail in your votes, because there you also don't know who exactly put in that cross and who put it in the envelope. So this is not a very new risk. It's probably just that the risk gets a bit broader. I think that the very difficult bit would be the recount of ballots. And as I said before, I don't yet have a solution to that particular issue. What does it mean then? If we want to go on with digitalization, it means that worker representative bodies need means and equipment to actually do so. Do now countries already allow or foresee these kinds of digital means. Lots of countries already do. A couple of them do explicitly do so. Lots of other countries say, we don't expressly mention anything, but if this is a standard equipment and if it's reasonably necessary for the execution of your functions, yes, please, then you have to have access to these means. That would mean that you would need access to a computer, that you need access to programs on which you can digitally interact and these things. And generally speaking, this would not be the main issue here. So compared to the issue that I talked about before, the decision-making in digital meetings, the question on which means on equipment a worker representative body should have access to, this is much less contested. So this is thankfully quite easy. When with regard to access to data, because that also is crucial. If you are digital and want to reach out, you need a platform on probably the employer's intranet. You may need access to employee workmail. You may need access to other data that are within the employment relation. There's one very clear case, once again, and that's France. France has this wonderful database. Lots of other countries do allow access to certain data, especially if it's like a mailing list of employee work mails. Private emails would be a different thing. There's also been discussion on being present on the employer's intranet. So this seems to be a quite individually regulated issue by state, but probably here also the new Works Council Directive, the new European Works Council Directive, will lead to some harmonization, because they also offer some access to data, not a lot, and it will obviously need to be implemented, but there is something in there as well. So maybe we'll see some developments here as well. So bringing me to my conclusions, can we and should we go on with digitalizing information consultation and digital employee representation? I think the answer is a clear yes, we should. We should also be mindful of the risks. So we have to make sure that all new forms of employee representation are accessible. This means training, information. We need to discuss the mode in which we're doing this. And we need to make sure to ensure the familiarity that everyone knows, that people that they actually trust the new modus that we find. And I put some of the main aspects on the slide. You need to have a single free confidential vote, which can be obviously that can be achieved. So that these are what I listed are the possible other possibilities that are already there, that already exist. And I think what we really need to think about is the reliability of the digital systems. Do we need external certification? Do we need, how do we build the trust? And I think that really is the crucial aspect here. How do we build the trust for employees to trust the machines? But, and that's really the final thing I want to say, we need more than just digital elections or digital meetings or digital decision making. If we really want digitalized decision making, digitalized employee participation, we need more than that. We need discussion spaces. We need some place where employees can feel that they're a community, where they can feel they can exchange ideas, where they can have that interaction that we used to have in the common working place. And If we just have digital elections and not this, then it's going to be this, oh, I will just give some vote to someone once every 2 or 3 or 4 years, and that's it. But it will not lead to true employee democracy in a digital world. So with this, I would like to thank you very much for your patience and excuse again for the fire alarm going off. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Nicola, for this very important presentation, in particular because you highlighted the importance of a democratic workplace also for democracy in general. And what was particularly interesting to me was the issue of access to data, because we cannot talk about digital meetings, digital elections without having in the first place also the required information for employee representatives, be it in a single channel system, be it in a dual channel system. And for all those not yet involved in the project, I would very briefly just highlight 2 judgments here, one by the Austrian Supreme Court of Justice of last winter, it was February 2025, where the Austrian Supreme Court of Justice held in the case brought forward by a works council of a food delivery company. So back then the riders were still real employees, where they had asked the employer for actually access to the employees' private email addresses. Employer had denied, and the court granted this access. Why? And that's the important passage of this judgment, because the court stated, well, within this very company, because it was, as we all know, a food delivery company, there was no common kind of place where the employees could actually come together, and electronic communication via email, via apps was the natural, so the usual way to communicate for employees. Therefore, for also employee representatives to be able to communicate, to get in touch with the employees, employer was then also obligated to issue the private email addresses. So a very important preliminary step to actually then having or being granted digital voting or meeting rights. And the second one is a now very infamous judgment already of the German Supreme Court of Justice on access to employees' professional email addresses for the trade union. So the German system being a dual channel system, where this access was denied. Also, not wanting to go into detail into the intricacies of German works representation, German constitutional law, but also because there were other means available for the trade unions to get in touch with the employees, other means less intrusive to the employer's right to conduct the business. So thank you very much, Nicola, for your presentation. And now without much ado, we would like to continue with Luca Ratti's presentation on our one aspect of our fourth coordinate, the what. Luca, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Elisabeth, and good morning, everyone. Well, I'm going to do something on the right to disconnect, and why, first of all, the right to disconnect, because it became very clear that it's not only something dealing with individual rights, but very much about the way social partners negotiate and employers decide to allow individuals and collectivities to exercise the right to disconnect. So I will start by just a few considerations on the past and then projecting them on the future. Well, of course, we all know there was a time when telework was very niche field in labor law research, a time when during job interviews, the candidates were asking about their own salary and career plans, and not at all how many days of telework do they have per week. A time when long working hours were spent at work in a place called workplace. Now, two things have dramatically turned all this upside down. On the one hand, massive use of digitalization. Digital tools have literally invaded workplaces in a way which was unprecedented. So we have seen the last couple of decades, but mostly in the last decade, that this massive use of digital tools, IT tools, etc., made it possible to work anywhere, anytime, and at any pace. And the second triggering element was, in fact, the pandemic restrictions. We did our exercise, our rehearsal, so to say, during the pandemic. This had an effect of accelerating what was already there to a certain extent. All this has been named time porosity, which means, this is a very nice expression used by Émile Génin, it means total blurring between working time and private life. And this made emerge the right to disconnect as one of the fundamental and promising aspects that, to a certain extent, needs to be regulated at any level. So what I'm about to do is three things. I would like to tell you something about the policy discussion, which is happening at EU level. So what has happened in the past, 2024, and what's going to happen in 2025. Then I'm going to test some of the policy issues that are on the table against existing legislation and case law, and also against the legal framework of several member states. So basically what's happening across European member states. And then lastly, I will do my own exercise on some policy proposals, knowing that I have a very exotic idea on how the right to disconnect could be regulated. Starting point. Where do we stand with existing legislation? Of course, some member states still are very hesitant, if not very much contrary to the introduction of a proper right to disconnect. Why this? Because they say working time directive is there. Working time rules, therefore, already provide for sufficient regulatory space. There's a clear distinction between working time and rest periods, which means that when we are not working, we are enjoying our rest periods. Of course, this is supported by a very rich case law of the Court of Justice and a quite elaborate, in fact, case law which made distinctions based on the binary divide between working time and rest, and stressing once again that rest periods must be consecutive and uninterrupted, and that working time / rest periods are there to protect the health and safety of workers. Of course, we could also speculate that behind all these working time rules, there's Article 31 of the Charter of Fundamental Rights. So not only the directive is important, it also, working time regulation has also a constitutional value. And therefore, why should we change or alter the balance which has been found by the EU legislator? Well, the triggering element came from a 2021 legislative initiative report by the European Parliament, which, based on Article 255 TFEU, pushed the European Commission to take legislative action on telework and the right to disconnect. So at that time, von der Leyen 1 Commission had no choice but to propose a legislative action. But at that time, they started to do a first round of consultation based, of course, on 154 TFEU. As we all know, the first round of consultation is rather general, in the sense that it's only about the direction the social partners wish the legislator to take. And on that, the responses by ETUC and Business Europe were very, very much positive one another, in the sense that ETUC and together with other trade unions were very much in favor of an introduction of the right to disconnect at EU level, whereas Business Europe was more on the abstention side, saying, why would we need a right to disconnect? Why would we need to increase compliance rules, increase complexity of the current legal framework? So in the end, against this very black and white response by the social partners, the Commission went back and started to work on 154 second round of consultation. And as we know, the second round of consultation is not anymore on the direction, it's more on the content, on the substance of EU action. And here I must say that they launched this second round of consultation in July, at the end of July 2025. So we could say that it's still ongoing, even though the deadline could have been already expired. But the real point about the second round of consultation is that we expected to see more substance. We expected that the European Commission had a much clearer view on what to do in this field. Instead, as I will tell you in a second, there's not that much substance in this second document. Therefore, the feedback from the social partners, which has been reframed not as European social dialogue, but like social partners talks with the Commission, which is very much diminishing the value of European social dialogue. As I said, the content is quite disappointing because there's not so much in it. But if we wanted to have a policy intervention on the right to disconnect, what would be, for me, my personal perspective, what would be the key aspects to consider? Well, first of all, what are we talking about? What are the values, that the rationales, the objectives that we are aimed to protect with the right to disconnect? And here I must say that the views are very diverse amongst the scholars and also in the policy documents that have been out until now. Because on the one hand, we could simply say right to disconnect concerns working time, hence we're protecting the health and safety of workers. But that's the easy answer. It's not only, of course, about this. It goes much broader. First of all, and this is reflected a little bit in the document, there is this mental health part. The right to disconnect is there to protect the mental health of workers, but at the same time, it's there to protect the work-life balance. So that's a second, and if not conflicting, complementary policy objectives with objective which is on the table. And then the consultation documents includes in the rationales also the fight against an always-on culture, which literally and technically is not a rationale, is not an objective. It cannot be as such identified, for instance, in Article 153. However, it remains that it's an important policy driver. Last but not least, are we covering working time, meaning health and safety, work-life balance, but are we sure we're not also covering the well-being at work, which is a value a little bit underneath? It's under the rug, has been under the rug so far, but it's behind several initiatives, particularly of soft law promoted by the European Union in recent years. So last but not least, since IT tools always involve the fact that the person is working anywhere, everywhere, and at any time, are we sure that a very last policy driver is not the right to privacy and to protect data protection of workers while they work remotely? So just to tell you that here we have a very big, a very broad palette of rationales and objectives. Second point on the definition. Well, the definition here is key. Comparative assessments refer that across several member states, we have different definitions. In some member states, the right to disconnect is properly defined as the right to disconnect, so from an employee perspective. In other member states, I have in mind Portugal, is the the duty for an employer not to ask reconnection, which is slightly different because it frames the right in terms of obligation, of employer's obligation. And then one of the possibly most puzzling elements from a policy perspective is how do we define not only the right to disconnect, but the duty to reconnect? Because of course, I might enjoy my right to disconnect, but at one point, across all member states, there is always a safeguard clause which is under the exceptional circumstances or under the force majeure or other general clauses. But in a way or another, across all member states, the employer is allowed to a certain extent to ask the employee to reconnect. And so the question is to what extent this can happen and what are the main justifications for this to happen. And last but not least, whether the reconnection must be compensated or not. You know that across the working time directive, there's no mention on the compensation, or at least the compensation of working time is really behind the scenes. If we had an action, a policy action initiative on the right to disconnect, it would be good also to clarify whether the employee enjoys the right to be compensated in case of reconnection. Last but not least, what do we mean by the interaction between right to disconnect and the rest periods? On the personal scope of application, well, there's a couple of important legal issues. First of all, the legal basis. Of course, if we want to cover only employees, no problem. We take 153 TFUs as the legal basis. But here we could be a little bit more inventive. We did this experiment already with the Platform Work Directive. If it's true that we're also protecting fundamental data protection rights, we could use Article 16 and therefore refer the right to disconnect not only to proper employees, but also to the self-employed. Secondly, on the personal scope, should we also include managers? That's a big discussion because, as we all know, Article 17 of the Working Time Directive in principle excludes from, exempts from some rules those who manage their own working time. And this is typically the case of managers. My view is that managers are very much exposed, possibly more exposed than others, to the dangers of the always-on culture. So in a way or another, I know that it is technically quite difficult, but in a way or another, I would very much like managers to be included in this personal scope of application. Last but not least, to which employers should the right to disconnect be applicable? Here I have, that's a personal opinion, I have the tendency to say that we should do our best not to overcomplicate the life of small enterprises, and therefore is not, if not exempting them, but at least simplifying a little bit the rules applicable to them. And then I come to the core. Identifying the legal source here is the core, in the sense that not only in this project, but in all discussions that we have seen on the right to disconnect, there are few alternatives that are there. And these alternatives, of course, involve the fact that, and then I go to my last slide, the fact that law is involved here, EU law and national law, but at the same time, collective agreements are involved. So there should be an articulation of legal sources of the right to disconnect, which on the one hand recognizes the right in black letter law, but on the other hand leaves as much leeway to collective agreements as possible to practically frame this. What's happening at European level? Well, the European level discussion is very much based on the one hand, what some member states already did, meaning that in some member states the right is already there. In some other member states, the right has been recognized by company collective agreements. In some other member states, the right is not there at all. Hence, the hesitation, which is very much evident between the lines of the second consultation document, the one which is out now, hesitation between basically two alternatives. Either we do a hard law measure, so basically a directive, or we do a soft law measure or a combination of soft law measures. Here, the communication cites a possible council recommendation, a communication, or a guidance, or a mix of them. I must say that I'm quite hesitant to see how guidance would be effective enough vis-a-vis the member states. I have had discussions previously before the second consultation document was out. And my view was that instead of reinventing the wheel, we should build on what we have. And what we have is the Working Time Directive. And therefore, if it's clear that the right to disconnect concerns some part of the Working Time Directive, I would very much plea for an enforcement directive of the Working Time Directive, which could be a targeted harmonization of specific aspects of the working time rules that are already in place, and would not force the European legislator to have a very, very difficult harmonization with the Working Time Directive itself. We've experienced enforcement directives in the past, in the field of posting of workers, in the field of social security coordination. It's a typical instrument, the enforcement legal act. However, so far, the European Commission does not seem to have followed these suggestions. So we will see whether the social partners will pick up the mandate which is behind Article 154, second part. If not, it will be for the European Commission to do a directive proposal or something else. Thank you so much for listening. I stop sharing and look forward to our debate.
Thank you so much, Luca, for your very interesting presentation, going from the very beginning to now the current status quo of a potential action at EU level on the right to disconnect. You've masterfully shown that you're one of the legal experts in this very field. And for everyone who is now kind of waiting for an EU action or a European social partner action, and then most probably, I dare say, going to be disappointed on that, I can always recommend reading the European Law Institute's guiding principles on a right to disconnect, a project which Luca was in charge of, and those guiding principles on the potential right to disconnect can be found on the ELI's website, European Law Institute. So thank you so much, Luca, again for giving us this excellent overview. We've come nearly to the end of today's online seminar, and we are very happy that our project coordinator and mastermind behind the whole project, José María Miranda Boto, was finally able to join us here, and who is going to present us the key aspects of the policy paper that we elaborated for this project. So José María, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Elisabeth. Thank you, everybody, for the presentations. Due to family reasons, I have not been able to join you until this moment, but I am sure that my colleagues presented excellently the results of our research team. Our last commitment in this project is to write a policy paper making proposals of legislation, mainly to the European Commission, but also to the stakeholders. This paper will be distributed to you in English as soon as I finish my very short presentation, and it will be disseminated by the members of our project in a translation to 12 national languages in order to give the biggest possible audience some food for thought about this issue. Let me check if I'm able to do that. Yeah. I will not delve into the content of our research, our policy paper. I will just present you some of our guidelines. One central idea is that our proposals should be examined by social dialogue. It doesn't make sense to impose a reform on social partners that deals with their rights, with their activities. So we think that if the European Commission, if any country starts any legal modification in a legal procedure on the digitalization of information and consultation rights, they should always take into consideration the role of social dialogue. As Elisabeth Brameshuber has told you, we had 4 coordinates in our project. We have proposals for those 4 coordinates, for those 4 questions: who, where, how, and what. With our proposals on the field of who, on the field of the scope of information and consultations rights, the bet of our policy paper is the expansion of rights. We are not being extremely creative here, but we are aligning ourselves with some legislative trends that already exist. The protection, for example, of data of workers and persons who perform work in the platform directives has been for us some kind of inspiration. The guidelines on collective bargaining for economically dependent workers has been another source of inspiration. In our policy paper, we deal with the legal basis that can be found in the Treaty on the Functioning of the European Union. You can see them of our main proposal that I'm not going to discuss now, but just to show it. Remember that you will be able to read our policy paper by the end of this intervention, is to add an Article 2 bis to the main directive on information and consultation, and extending those rights and all that it means being in that directive to the people who are economically dependent. How do we define them? We have taken into account, for example, the case law of the Court of Justice, the Elite Taxi ruling, and there you can read our proposal about under their influence or certain control relying primarily on his or her personal labor, remuneration, etc., etc. This is a first proposal just to put on the table the idea. I'm not going to develop our proposal on where it has been prepared under the leadership of Elisabeth Brameshuber. I imagine that she has presented it. And in our text, in the policy paper, you will find a proposal that deals with this issue. The current regulations, either Rome 1 or Rome 2, do not cover the issue of information and consultation rights in a transnational dimension. We know that we are being very daring when proposing the approval of a new regulation that deals with these issues, but we think that our role as academic lawyers committed to presenting ideas to the funding authority, we must explore every way and thus even make proposals that can be later discussed or whatever. That's our role, I insist. As academics, we are not policymakers, we are making suggestions. So our role is to show to the stakeholders the problems that we have detected. We believe that in its current state, European Union law has the capacity to create this regulation under Article 81. So it's a possibility. Concerning how, I imagine that Nicola Gundt has made an excellent presentation on all the issue of digital tools. This is a very delicate question from our point of view, as it deals with the activities of trade unions on their own, nothing to say about that, but also with the activity within the company. And that's where our proposals put the point on an amendment on Directive 2002/14 in order to digitalize information and consultation rights. Of course, we know that this is going to be expensive. And that's, you can see there in my slide in the third point. Companies cannot bear on themselves the burden of this digitalization.
José María, I'm sorry to interrupt you. We still see your very first slide.
Okay, that's the thing of making something about digitalization and not being able to pass the slides. Can you see them now?
We're now with the how, digital tools and access. Yes.
Oh,
thank you.
Sorry, my absolutely illiteracy when dealing with digitalization. You will see it small. Let me try if I can do something like that. Okay. Sorry for not being a proper computer and not being able, yes, to do that. We think that we need the financial support mechanisms. As I was saying, companies cannot bear the burden of this digitalization, so tax incentives, EU funding can be established in order to do this, up to every member state to decide how do this. And I think this is a rule that we must use for all the transitions, either digital, ecological, or the next transition, the sustainable transition. We need a strong intervention in the form of support from the state. In our policy paper, we propose mainly 3 ideas. Some of them come from the recent platform work directive. First of all, we propose the idea of the employee representatives being given the necessary digital tools and relevant training. In our research, we have seen that the majority of member states have some legislation that deals with physical tools. For example, in Spain, trade unions in a certain company of a certain size have the right to have a room for them. To have a room, we can explore the idea of giving digital tools, providing computers, providing Teams platforms, providing other issues. Our second point goes to the professional email addresses. That's just an example, but we understand that we need to digitalize the movement of information. Many legislations have accepted, for example, the idea of distribution of copies in paper. Email is cheaper, email is faster, email is more useful. You can give more information in less time, and we think this can be a benefit. And we say email as an example because, for example, in some countries, like my own, Spain, the Supreme Court has already ruled on the idea of using company apps as a way to distribute this information. Our third proposal on this is the equivalence of digital means. If you need a signature in paper, you can have a document with a digital signature. We are not creating mad things with our proposals. We are trying to be practical and to ensure that things that are being done, and I must thank all the stakeholders that we have had the pleasure of collaborating with during our research, they have given us a very clear picture of the reality within the companies, within trade unions, within employer organizations. So we have had as academics a very clear idea of what is really needed. Our fourth coordinate is what about contents. Luca Ratti, with his usual brilliance, has presented you the great company, we could say, the elephant in the room, the right to disconnect. In this extremely short presentation, I will just put my point on artificial intelligence and algorithmic governance. European Union law has already developed some mechanisms within the platform directive in order to start working on algorithmic governance. We know that the European Parliament is proposing also an omnibus directive on algorithmic governance. We mentioned that in our policy paper, but what we propose effectively is to transfer into the framework directive the contents that are already established in the platform work directive. Thus, information and consultation, on decisions that may lead to the introduction of automated decision-making systems. This is the Spanish lay rider, something where my country has been a pioneer, not in the platform directive. Algorithms are not anymore only in platforms, are everywhere, so we propose that the same right that exists for platform workers should be extended to all workers. Our main final conclusion is that the digitalization of information and consultation rights should be a benefit for both parts of the labor relationship, for the both parts of industrial relations. Information and consultation rights are called to be a tool of anticipation of change, and we think that it is essential to develop digital literacy, not like mine that I'm not able to share my slides with you in this presentation, but we think that on terms of productivity, on terms of social peace, improving the knowledge of algorithmic literacy, digital skills will be a benefit for both workers, labor representatives, and employers. Our most risked proposal is the creation of an European Union Digital Adaptation Fund. There is already the Digital Europe program support that supports digital training initiatives. So we have the fund for globalization. Perhaps it's the time for the fund to digital adaptation. The European Social Fund has been a story of success for decades. Perhaps it's also time for the European Social Fund to go digital. Our main academic results will be published by Hard Publishing in a book that we finish next year. It will be in open access, so you will be able to see our more academic considerations. For our policy paper, you can see now it in the chat of this conference. You will be able to download there the English version of the text. By the end of this week, the translations to all other languages of our projects, excluding Irish, will be available in our website. The members of the project will conduct a task of dissemination to all national stakeholders, and I only have 1 minute to thank you for attending our seminar. I'm sorry that we won't have time for discussion, but as you will have our contact data, and if you are interested in keep up with our research, discussing with us, all the members of the team are available through our website. Thank you very much to the 3 speakers that covered for me until I was able to be here. And it's 11 o'clock, so I give again the word to Elisabeth Brameshuber.
Thank you so much, José María. I can only give the thanks also again to you, to Nicola Gundt from Maastricht University, and to Luca Ratti from University of Luxembourg, as well as to all the colleagues of the project of the 12 member states, including Turkey represented in the project. And simply forward everyone to reading the policy paper and then waiting for the book published with Hard Publishing in 2026, which we're all very much looking forward to. So have a great morning and afternoon, and see you hopefully very soon again. Bye-bye.
Okay. Should we expel them from the room?
I don't know what we can do.
Let me check if I can do that. Yes.
You don't have to exit. Thank you very much.
Done. Thank you very much.
Lydia.
Thank you very much for covering for me.
But there's still one participant in the room.
Yeah. Not anymore.
No.
Okay. I think
Perfect.
it has been a success. Lots of
No,
people.
and I made several screenshots. I'm going to send it to you where you can very nicely see that there's 58 participants and yeah.
And I will give the emails to chat to Copilot in order to prepare some kind of people coming from 25 countries were able to join.
Excellent. The seminar.
Thank you very much for covering, because I was in such a hurry.
There's still Isabel. No worries at all. It was just, Microsoft Teams apparently does not feature some waiting room, right? Because at the beginning it was a bit strange. I had only realized afterwards that everyone was able to listen to our kind of technical tryout.
Okay. No, because they had the invitation to join directly. All those people who were in the forums were sent an invitation. Don't worry.
Yeah, no, just for future presentations that we might want to do, we might want to kind of think of improvement.
The great thing is that that's the job of Judith and Daniel, and not anymore our job.
No, but
let me be blunt about this, unless we get the horizon, naturally. Nicola, you owe me the information about your teaching in Katowice. Remember, you promised to send me a paragraph and a picture in order to upload it.
I told you I don't have the pictures. Lucas has the pictures.
But how, he has not sent it to you? Okay, I will ask Lucas. Just prepare a short paragraph so we can put also, because in the final report.
Stop the recording too, because we're right.
Yeah, I will cut it later.
You cut it later, okay?
Yeah, of course. We won't have this. Okay, so
excellent.
Thank you very much. Everything was done.
Everything fine with your father?
Today he had the lumbar puncture. They had to extract the liquid from the spine.
Yeah, and you will know the results at a later stage.
We'll have the results on Friday. But today he was a little bit. Yeah, I'm optimist. There is a cognitive damage, but he will start next week some kind of rehabilitation, doing tangram and sudokus and that kind of thing in order to improve that concrete part of the brain. But I am optimistic concerning.
Did he suffer stroke? Did he suffer stroke?
Indeed, when they make the TAC, they discovered that there was some small brain stroke that we never noticed. But in any case, well, today it was more an issue of him wanting to, that's my father, my mother. You can see the portraits in the dining room showing the importance in the house. This is Spain. Now, it was more a question of him being afraid of going alone to that. It was not painless, was not long. It was just a little bit going there, blah, 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 blah. But,
waiting.
Yeah. Then we are going to have some trips as lunch before I go back to Santiago. So I think everything is in order.
You will not stay until Friday for the results.
No, because I have to do all my job on the other day, and indeed they are sending me the results. So I will be the intermediary on communicating that.
Okay.
So thank you very much.
Thanks to you. Thank you also, Nicola, for making the time. Is your Lady well or sick now?
She's at school.
Okay.
This is cool. Excellent. Okay. So thank
It
you
was
so
great
much.
seeing you again, and I have to figure out something for my course on collective labor law
Okay.
to
Yes.
get you all here.
We'll
Thanks a
discuss
lot.
it.
Bye.
Bye.